From the instant you're born, you are invested in something. As a baby, it's eating, it's sleeping, it's breathing, and it's shitting. But as you grow up, you begin to invest your time into a lot of different things. For some people, it'll be sports, and for others, it might be family. But I would say at a point in everyone's life, they will be heavily invested in some sort of TV show. When you find yourself putting a lot of your personal time into one of these things, it can be frustrating or upsetting when the end product just isn't how you imagined, and it can completely take away your enjoyment from that thing. Although everyone wants their favorite TV show to turn out like Breaking Bad with one of the most flawless finales put to screen, that's a very unrealistic standard. Most shows go way past their shelf life, turning more and more sour as each new season releases. In that case, you'll be lucky if you get a series finale like The Office, where every character has their arcs wrapped up very nicely and it feels like they're going back to what made the show beloved in the first place. If you're not that lucky, you get a finale like Game of Thrones, where the show turns from one of the greatest of all time to something that no one even talks about anymore, unless of course they're mentioning how bad it is. Every once in a while, due to the creators putting out an alternate ending, you'll get both. And that was the case with How I Met Your Mother. When I was in middle school, I started a crusade to watch all the mainstream content that I had missed out on over the years, and for whatever the reason, How I Met Your Mother was one of the first for me. I think a big reason was because it was constantly referenced in pop culture while I was growing up, and each time a new season would come out on Netflix, they would push it hard. Despite my reasoning for why I watched the show first, I did, and I really liked it. In the first few minutes of the pilot, it established each character's motivation throughout nearly the entire show, and by the time the credits rolled, I knew I was in for a treat. So, was I right? Kinda. I really enjoyed watching How I Met Your Mother, but it felt like Empty Calories the TV show. Each episode that I watched, I would find myself getting annoyed with Ted in particular. He was constantly putting himself before the interest of everyone else in his life, and a lot of the time it made him a very unlikable protagonist. To me, the show was at its peak when Marshall was off doing some wacky shenanigans, or Barney had a completely stupid scheme to get laid. Sure, that's Empty Calories too, but it's much more interesting than anything Ted was ever getting himself into. Which sucks because that wasn't always the case. Season 1, Episode 10, The Pineapple Incident, is one of the funniest episodes of the show, and while each character is involved, Ted is absolutely front and center. Even from the pilot episode, it sets up that Ted's character should be great throughout the rest of the show, with some great motivation leading him there. Also, his first couple of relationships are wonderful, with Victoria being a great jumping off point for him and the viewers, and Robin falling behind her being just excellent in Season 2. Unfortunately, as each season passed, it seemed like all the lessons Ted was learning should have been standards in his adult life, and that's just the episodes where he learns something instead of not picking up on the lesson and continuing to be the same way. This is when it became very clear to me that the showrunners did not expect the story to drag out this long. Each love interest felt more and more forced and more annoying. Most of the storylines devolved into the same shtick that we had become used to, and it fell into the same trap that most sitcoms do. It stopped evolving. That is, until midway through Season 8 when they flipped things on their head and had Barney propose to Robin. Although some people may have seen this coming, it was a genuine left turn from what they had set up, and in a lot of ways it made sense for both of these characters. It also made me intensely curious to see what they had planned for the final season, with each character's storylines, outside of Marshall and Lily, coming to a head. Unfortunately though, as I watched through Season 9, it became very clear to me that this would be one of my least favorite seasons. The through line of Barney and Robin's wedding was nice, but it was just more evidence that the show was running on fumes. And for me, the only real reason to watch this season was to see how Ted met the mother, and after all this waiting, it should have been impossible for the showrunners to pull it off. It felt like there had been so much buildup that anything less than perfect would not have been accepted. Somehow though, they pulled it off, with Tracy, the mom, being a charismatic, charming, and amazing supporting character to the mainstays we had had up to that point. It really did feel like this once unattainable ending was obtained, and the show was going to stick the landing. And while it may have felt like that, the two-part finale made sure it would fall on its face. I have a ton of problems with how they ended this this show, starting off with Barney and Robin. After dedicating a whole season to their willingness to change who they once were and commit to one another, finally fulfilling each of their story arcs, the creators have them get divorced the episode after their wedding. What the fuck? Canonically, I guess this makes some sense. It has been 3 years after they got married, and it's clear that they've been having some marital problems. These issues seem completely unbelievable, though, if you've watched the show. Barney would never decide that he didn't like Robin being away for work and furthering her career. At any other point in the show, he would have loved this for her because it makes her just a little bit more awesome. The only reason the creators made this decision was to have Ted and Robin get back together in the end, which was the single decision that turned the show from a classic that would have been talked about for years to something that people still talk about, but not as highly. I know and understand why this decision was made. The creators wanted to shoot all the scenes that involved Ted's children early in the show's run, so that by the end of the show, the children didn't look like they were in their 30s. The consequences of that decision meant that the ending of the show had to be written during the first couple seasons of the show's run. This aligned with the peak of Ted and Robin's relationship, which everyone had loved at the time, so the decision was made for both of them to get back together in the end. Maybe if the show finished its run after 4 seasons, this would have made sense and the people would have liked it, but the reality is that the audience grows and evolves alongside each character, that by the finale it didn't make sense for Ted to go back to Robin. That relationship was toxic, and they each had what they had wanted from the very start. Also, if you've never seen the show, you may be asking, why is Ted able to get back together with Robin in the first place? Didn't he marry someone else? Yes, Ted did marry someone else, but they ended up killing her off at the end of the last episode anyways. And while that scene is very realistic and emotional, it's super annoying to know that the only reason it's in the show is because the creators had to set up Ted and Robin's forever after. And yes, while there is some very good stuff in the finale, like Ted and Tracy's first encounter at the bus station and the scene with everyone at the bar for the last time, it's completely overshadowed by these major problems, and with the IMDb scores for these episodes being some of the lowest through the series, I know I'm not alone. So after I finished the final episode, I kind of forgot about the show. Of course I remembered that I had watched it, and certain great episodes stuck out in my mind, but overall I just didn't care. I enjoyed what I had watched for the most part, but the series had lost me. That was until one day when YouTube recommended me an alternate ending of the show that changed my entire outlook. Now, most pieces of media do have alternate endings. It just makes sense that as someone is writing something, they create a bunch of different ways the story could end. These endings just normally aren't produced, and if they are, it's a very bare bones product most of the time. How I Met Your Mother is no exception to this rule. All it did was add in some scenes from the older seasons as well as a new voiceover, and just that made a world of difference. The voiceover they added makes everything that happened up to that point much more poignant for each of the characters. Instead of having Ted reflect negatively on his experiences because Tracy died, he looks back fondly because she's still alive and there to remind him that those lessons he learned and the heartbreak he suffered was just a bump on the road to finding his true love. It also insinuates that Robin and Barney are happy just being friends again, with him being a loving father and her being a world-class news reporter. It activates nostalgia in you by showing you some of the show's most memorable scenes, and it ends beautifully with Ted finally telling the kids that that is how he met their mother. With this small inclusion of the alternate ending on the DVD extras, this show met the expectations that so many had once had for its ending. It was never going to fix all the problems with the show, or even the finale, but with a few small tweaks, it made an impact. Now when I look back on How I Met Your Mother, the first thing on my mind is how great that ending is. I don't feel like my investment was all for naught. I feel like they paid me back with a satisfying series, and that's something that I'll get to cherish forever. And I'm glad that How I Met Your Mother had this alternate ending, but I'm also glad no one else followed suit, because when I'm watching your show, I want to see the finale be realized on my first watch, and How I Met Your Mother just did not deliver.